Hi everyone, the topic of our presentation is based on Neve Gordon's article, Human Rights as a Security Threat, Lawfare and the Campaign Against Human Rights NGOs. In this presentation, we will show how the term lawfare is being developed as a speech act in order to encode the field of human rights as a national security threat. First of all, we will introduce the background of the general environment, which includes the critique of human rights as a security threat. What does lawfare do? The Israeli case study and factors affecting human rights work. In our first part, I will introduce the critique of human rights. Universal human rights have been subjected to a variety of critiques ever since they are appeared on the political stage following the horrors of World War II. Several of these criticisms relate to rights work itself, and over the years, human rights practitioners have used the critique as a launchpad to further develop human rights laws and norms, and to establish new institutions and practices that enhance and protect them. One aspect of these developments includes the increasing ability to subject practices developed during conflict and warfare to legal oversight. This in turn has allowed individuals and groups to file suits against government officials and security personnel who allegedly carried out war crimes in a course that exercise universal jurisdiction. Universal jurisdiction is based on the notion that there are acts which are so universally appalling that states have an interest in exercising universal jurisdiction to combat them. A basic principle informing universal jurisdiction is the extraterritoriality of international law, namely, the idea that international law can be applied to alleged criminal acts that have occurred outside the state territory, where it is being deliberated even if the alleged violation has been perpetrated by a non-national and even if the state's nationals have not been harmed. Acts that are subjected to universal jurisdiction include extrajudicial executions, deliberate targeting of civilians in military operations, torture, enslavement, enforced disappearances, the use of indiscriminate weapons, collective punishment, nuclear arms, smuggling, intentional destruction of civilian infrastructure, and numerous other acts that constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. The intensive development of universal jurisdiction in the past 2 decades can be seen as reflecting a certain power shift in international arena where non-state actors are increasingly take part in challenging state agents. In point of fact, the development of universal jurisdiction is not new. The Nuremberg trial as well as Eichmann trial were based on universal jurisdiction. The International Court of Justice have been providing advisory opinions for half a century about interstate disputes concerning the conduct of armed conflict. But the ICJ only hears cases filed by states. And only in the past 2 decades has it become more common for individuals and groups to use universal jurisdiction to file suits against alleged criminals. Currently, non-state actors have 3 kinds of venues for filing such suits: the International Criminal Court, a few regional courts, and scores of national courts. Indeed, a survey carried out by Amnesty International indicates that 166 of the 193 United Nations member states have defined one or more of 4 crimes under international law: war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and torture, as crimes in their national law, and 147 out of 193 states have provided for universal jurisdiction over one or more of these crimes. An examination of when these countries amend their laws in order to include or broaden universal jurisdiction in their criminal code reveals that 91 of 147 countries introduced amendments after the year 2000, and 118 countries introduced changes after 1990, underscoring the relative novelty of this phenomenon. An early example of the use of universal jurisdiction in domestic courts occurred in 1998, when Spain requested that the United Kingdom extradite General Augusto Pinochet on grounds of widespread torture carried out during US-led Operation Condor, in which Pinochet was implicated. Since then, 18 cases have been brought before the ICC, and hundreds of other suits have been filed in countries such as France, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Turkey, and the United Kingdom, primarily against military personnel and government officials from Africa and Latin America, but also against officials from the United States and Israel. It is important to note, even if in passing, that the actual practice of universal jurisdiction is not without force, and that scholars of different stripes have discussed its limitations and biases. The objective of our presentation is to show how its use against government and military officials, specifically from the United States and Israel, has engendered a strong reaction from neoconservatives directed against the liberal human rights NGOs.
Now it is my part to talk about human rights as a security threat. Firstly is the background. The increasing exercise of universal jurisdiction is the main reason for a noticeable, if gradual, shift in the past decade in which liberal human rights NGOs in Israel and abroad are being branded as a security hazard by neoconservative actors. The movement towards the securitization of these NGOs is part of a process that began to take shape after 9/11 terrorist attacks, and even more intensely after the publication of the UN fact-finding mission on the Gaza conflict, also known as the Golden Star Report. Building on ideals advanced by the Copenhagen, the security to mean a specific field of practice constituted around issues relating to threats and challenges to state sovereignty by other states and non-state actors. The crucial point is that security is not an objective condition, but rather is socially constituted through speech acts. Then is the speech act theory. Well, speech act theory is multifaceted. In this article, author refer to John Austin's argument that language not only describes phenomenon, but often does something in the world. In Austin's framework, locution is what was said, allocution is what was meant, and perlocution is what happened as a result. For example, when somebody says, "Is there any thought at the dinner table?" the allocutionary act, the meaning convert is effectively, "Please give me some thought," even though the locutionary act, the literary sentence, was to ask a question about the presence of thought. The perlocutionary act, the actual effect, was to cause somebody to hand over the thought. So the two kinds of speech acts are relevant to the securitization process. The allocutionary speech act performed by virtue of the word outed, like promising to pay back someone a loan. The perlocutionary act of speech performed as a consequence of words, as when someone convinces a friend to vote for a political party. The idea in forming perlocutionary speech acts is that saying something can produce certain consequential effects upon the feelings, thoughts, and actions of the audience, or of the speaker, or of other persons, and it may be done with the design, intention, or purpose of producing them. The Copenhagen School maintains that security is not simply a sign that refers to a socially constituted phenomenon, but rather that by saying security or other words such as threat or, and in our case, lawfare, something is done, as in betting, giving a promise, naming a ship. So security uses speech acts to frame an issue either as a special kind of politicals or as above politicals, which paves the way for exceptional intervention that may violate normal legal and social rules. Once its approach is adopted, then it becomes possible that any sector or at any particular time might be the most important focus for concerns about threats, vulnerabilities, and defense. It's the component of successful securitization. In the article, authors summarize that successful securitization has three steps. Firstly is the securitization actor uses speech acts to designate an existent threat. Then the threat is framed in such a way so that it requires emergency intervention or special measures, and this creates the legitimacy for demanding the right to govern actions by breaking free of rules and determining new priorities. In addition, the success of this process is contingent upon its ability to inform public discourse and become part of society's common sense, as a significant audience must accept the designation of an issue as a security threat for it to become a security threat. Moreover, as the process, securitization materialized over time and can be abstract or accelerated along the way. It can be stopped in middle course and fail. It can be successful, or it may produce only partial results. It is also important to note that the Copenhagen School distinguishes among three types of units of analysis. First, there are referent objects, which are the themes conceived to be or construct as existentially threatened. Second, there are the securitizing actors, namely the actor who securitize issue by declaring something, the referent object, existentially threatened, and by designating the source of the threat. In this study, the securitizing actors are academics, NGOs, think tanks, civil society groups, policy makers, and legislators. Finally, there are functional actors who significantly influence decisions in the field, and in this case are considered the source of the threat, namely liberal human rights NGOs. What is unique about this case study is not the referent objects as states and their particular Socio-political relations are often constructed as facing an existential threat, but rather the network of securitizing actors and the decision to assign the source of the threat to human rights NGOs. Finally is the conclusion. The above is where lawfare enters the picture. Lawfare has been used to encode the field of human rights, and in this way has helped frame human rights work in Israel as a security threat. The constant iteration of accusation human rights work is lawfare by a set of securitizing actors propose a specific set of actions aimed to abstracting human rights work. Then this paper turned into an analysis of how lawfare has been deployed to securitize human rights in Israel and how this securitization process have helped curb the work of rights groups.
Hello, class and professor. It is my great pleasure to deliver a speech in front of you. I am Lin Tao. Today, I'm going to introduce and explain what does the lawfare do here. Firstly, I will introduce the definition of lawfare, then the origin of the lawfare, and some thoughts about whether the lawfare is positive or negative. Finally, I will give some examples among countries and non-governmental organizations from the past to help the further understand of what does the lawfare do. According to some extinct papers, there are various definitions from the different scholars. For example, Nave Gordon had written in the essay Human Rights as a Security Threat. Lawfare and the campaigns against human rights NGOs that lawfare is the misuse of legal systems and the principles against an enemy, such as by damaging or delegitimizing them, trying up their time, or winning a public relations victory. The term is the portmanteau of the words law and welfare. Here, what is the worst is for us to obtain is lawfare is the combination of the law and the welfare. Based on the summary of the online and the material related papers, a more accurate definition of lawfare should be as followed. Now, let's turn to the next part, the origin of the lawfare. Here, I just gathered some information from the internet for reference. Perhaps the first use of the term lawfare was in the 1975 manuscript Westergaard's The Law, which agrees that the Western legal system has become overly contentious and utilitarian as compared to the more humanitarian non-basis Eastern system. In Gordon's essay, it says that lawfare was originally linked to the exercise of the universal jurisdiction, but has eventually become the firework thoughts about which human rights work in the liberal democracies more generally is being securities. It is, in other words, the point of the entry thoughts which numerous securitized actors are coalescing to construct human rights as a security threat. Those actors has been mobilizing the media, shaping public opinion, lobbying legislators and policymakers, introducing new law, pursuing donate, and employing a varieties of other methods to pave the way for a form of the exceptional interventions against rights organizations. The United States administrations has always been cautious about the application of universal jurisdiction, but even since international law began being deployed to check certain practices utilized in the global war on the terrorism, it has adopted an oppositional stance. Now, scholars are debating whether lawfare is a positive or negative term. And here are a few ideas. In the positive way, such as Benjamin writes, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institutions has agreed that lawfare should not have only a negative connotation, but that it also refers to the sharply contested legal debates in the US surrounding national security and the national security law. White writes that the name lawfare refers both to the use of the law as a weapon of conflict and perhaps more importantly, to the depressing realities that America remains at war with itself over the law governing its war with others. In negative ways, the lawfare project agrees that lawfare is exclusively negative, defining it as an abuse of the Western law and the judicial system to achieve strategies, military, or policy ends. From this perspective, lawfare consists of the negative manipulation of the international and the national human rights law to accomplish purpose other than or contract to those for which they were originally enacted. Does the above give you basic idea of what does the lawfare do? However, only to look at some specific case in the reality, then we can know it in depth. Lawfare is obviously used in the current Israel-Palestinian conflict. To begin with, the NGOs form of the 2001 Durban's conference called for the establishment of the War Crime Tribunal against Israel. NGOs has used the universal jurisdiction status in Europe and North America to bring forward such as cases. Those states follow courts to preside over a case in which one or more of the parties or events and issues are foreign. In some countries, such as Spain, an NGO can apply to courts directly for an arrest or to launch a criminal investigation without the knowledge or approved notes of the government. Many cases has been brought forward against Israel officials and those associated with the Israel military, accusing them of the war crimes. Those cases has been heard in both Israel and in other countries. Since then, the use of the lawfare also continues in this conflict. Which side did the results favors? Is the lawfare or misuse of the law or not? I think we should think further. Thank you. That is all my part in what does the lawfare do here. Next, let's my partner to introduce the Israel cases study. Thank you.
Well, this part I will talk about the Israeli case. It contains the background, the parties of the case, the construction of human rights as a security threat. And the first part is about the background. You may heard about this military campaign. It named Operation Cascade. It happened between Israel and Hamas. The campaign began with Israeli aerial attacks on December 27, 2008, and followed by a ground invasion on January 3rd, which lasted until January 18, 2009. Obviously, it is a modern war. Both of the parties use a lot of modern weapons, like the rockets, the tanks, so it caused heavy casualties. More than 1,000 people were killed, and more than half of them are only normal citizens, and a lot of them were minors under age 18. When the war ended, the United Nations Human Rights Council decided to make the Goldstone Report. It aimed to investigate all violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law that might have been committed at any time in the context of the Operation Past Lead that were conducted in Gaza. However, the Israeli government refused to cooperate with United Nations fact-finding mission and didn't provide any testimony or evidence. The International Commission concluded that both Israel and Hamas had breached international humanitarian law and had committed potential war crimes and crimes against humanity. But the brunt of the criticism was directly towards Israel, claiming that it had intentionally targeted civilians. The next part is the parties of the case. It can be directly divided into two basic camps. The first one is the parties that criticize Israel. The main force is liberal human rights organizations. They file criminal and civil lawsuits in national and international legal forums against prominent military and government figures for alleged violations of international law. Another one is the New Israel Fund. It is the single largest donor to Israeli human rights organizations and has raised more than 200 million over the years, primarily from Jewish donor outside Israel. And the opposing camps is the parties that support Israel. It contains the Israel government and the Knesset, the NGO Monitor, and Terzu. The first and second are easy to understand, and the third one is a grassroots organization that was established in 2006 in order to renew in its words Zionist discourse, Zionist thinking, and Zionist ideology to ensure the future of the Jewish nation and of the state of Israel. According to the organization's website, a major portion of Terzu's efforts is devoted to combating the campaign of delegitimization against the state of Israel. So as we have known the parties of the case, we can try to figure out how could the parties that support Israel frame the liberal human rights organization as security threat. So the last part is the construction of human rights as security threat. The government and Knesset claiming that the report, the Goldstone report, ties the hands of democratic countries fighting terror worldwide. And then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the military, the NGO Monitor, the BSA Center for Strategy Studies, as well as a few other organizations put out lots of reports, policy briefs, press releases, and governmental statements to form a doctrine about lawfare and how it constitutes a national threat. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs published a long report titled The Campaign to Defame Israel. They asserted in that report that the strategy to delegitimize Israel using legal frameworks and exploring both international and national legal forums was adopted following numerous failed military attempts to destroy the Jewish state. And he also claims that war is a continuation of political activity by other means. So too, lawfare is a continuation of terrorist activities by other means. The ministry's logic is straightforward. Lawfare is a form of terrorism, and the liberal human rights non-government organizations are lawfare enablers. Hence, liberal human rights non-government organizations are part of the terrorism network. Then, in January 2011, the Knesset voted overwhelmingly in favor of establishing a panel of inquiry to probe sources of funding for rights groups accused of delegitimizing the Israeli military. Israeli legislators had introduced a spate of 30 anti-democratic bills. The most pertinent bill is a proposed amendment to the Israeli Association Law and the Israeli Income Tax Ordinance, which would prohibit foreign public funding of Israeli organizations that support indictment of elected officials and IDF soldiers in international court. The NGO Monitor and Termsu also took a lot of measures. They thought the Goldstone report was a form of lawfare. So they tried to portray the report as a blood libel against the Jewish state. Because a considerable amount of fundings were based on reports and testimonies provided by human rights organizations, several of them Israeli. They also launched a series of campaigns. They published briefs, opinions articles in newspapers, and sent representatives to appear in several television and radio talk shows, framed the Goldstone report and human rights organizations as existential threat to Israel. All these statements and campaigns made by the Israel government and NGO Monitor and Terzu shaped the attitude and opinions of Israelis towards human rights organizations. This can be shown in surveys. In 2003, 57% of Israelis considered Israeli human rights organizations in a favorable way, while only 13% considered that the local rights organization unfavorably. However, in 2011, the percentage of those who considered Israeli human rights organization in a favorable way had decreased to 41%, while the percentage of people who considered human rights organizations unfavorably had more than doubled, reached 31%. Apparently, the campaigns launched against liberal human rights organizations have engendered growing public animosity toward human rights organizations. 58%, in other words, more than half of Jewish Israelis responded that the liberal human rights non-government organizations should not be allowed it, or that they should be allowed it only to a very limited degree. As the new Israel Fund, which is the single largest donor to Israeli human rights organizations, also be influenced. It changed its funding guidelines and stopped paneling donations to organizations it had worked with in the past. They think universal jurisdiction is a reserve tool in the fight against impunity. It should be applied where the justice system of the country that was home to the violations is unable or unwilling to do so. In other words, courts in the territorial state that are able to and willing to prosecute individuals for crimes should have the priority in exercising jurisdiction over the crimes. So, the new Israel Fund decided not to support liberal human rights organizations that favor the use of universal jurisdiction outside Israeli territory. The upshot is that Israeli human rights organizations that wish to receive support from the NIF and not directly submit evidence caught abroad and have to extremely careful when displaying any other kind of active or even vocal support for universal jurisdiction. So far, the liberal human rights organizations have been regarded, be reframed as security threat.
I will introduce factors affecting human rights work. First, I will talk about the background. In a meeting with former Danish Justice Minister, Israeli Foreign Minister Aranda Lieberman declared that the rules of war need to be changed to allow democracy to combat terrorist threats. The idea behind Lieberman's declaration was to change international humanitarian law so as to exclude its full application in certain kinds of conflicts. Reisner, the former head of the Iranian military international law department, exposed how Israel thought it could change international law. If you do something for long enough, the world will accept it. The whole of international law is now based on the notion that an act that is forbidden today becomes permissible if executed by enough countries. After we built the reactor in Iraq, the Security Council condemned Israel and claimed the attack was a violation of international law. The atmosphere was that Israel had committed a crime. Today, everyone says it was preventive self-defense. International law progresses through violations. We invented the targeted assassination physics and we had to push it. At first, there were protections that made it hard to insert easily into legal modes. 8 years later, it is in the center of the bones of legitimacy. While Lieberman and Reisner would have liked to change international law, it seems highly unlikely that altering the law's black letter will be possible in the foreseeable future. What is happening on the ground, however, is that the courts in Israel and the United States often interpret international law in a way that is favorable to the security establishment in their country. In addition, the inability to actually alter black letter law has led to the adoption of two other strategies. In order to dilute the potency of universal jurisdiction, domestic laws that enable local courts to use international humanitarian and human rights laws to prosecute foreign nations have to be changed. One of the strategies introduced by the United States then is to limit an exercise of universal jurisdiction in national courts, and this has been happening in the countries like Spain and the United Kingdom. Second, it is crucial to limit the flow of information reaching these courts. Accordingly, in order to circumscribe the efficacy of universal jurisdiction suits, it becomes necessary to heighten the work of liberal human rights organizations that produce and disseminate evidence about social wrongs perpetrated by military personnel and government officials, particularly as that constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity, and torture. New conservatives use lawfare as a speech act that constitutes rights were within a security frame. A group of securitizing actors use speech acts to designate the Liberian human rights NGOs as an existential threat, that the threat has been framed in such a way so that it requires emergency intervention or special measures,
and that this creates the legitimacy for demanding special actions and determining new priorities. The paradox is that the campaign against liberating human rights NGOs has been carried out through practice and process that are appalled in every democracy textbook. In the case of Israel, members of civil society have raised an issue and put it on the public agenda. They have then lobbied legislators and policymakers to introduce new laws and appear to have succeeded in swaying public opinion and changing the policy of a major donor organization to human rights work. It is important to recognize, however, that the campaign against human rights organizations is informed by Emmett Broad's famous claim that there is no such thing as the abstract rights of man, only the rights of Englishmen. For those leading the campaign in Israel, the nation presides and shapes the human, and therefore the rights of the nation subjects must be protected even at the expense of human rights. The struggle, in other words, is also about the renunciation of human rights. The danger of secularization programs is that it aims to limit the work of human rights organizations through restricting the discourse and activities that they deploy. According to the report summing up the meeting of a focus group seminar where members from 9 Israeli human rights organizations discussed the declining reputation of local human rights organizations among the Israeli public. One of the suggestions was to change the wording of the press releases published by rights group. The report suggests that in the past, a press release could have stated that Israel's prohibition on transferring goods from Gaza to the West Bank is an illegal practice designed to punish the Palestinian residents of Gaza to cut off them from their brethren in the West Bank, under the guise of false security claims and the misleading notion that Gaza is no longer occupied. Following the discussions in the focus groups, passionate conduct that rights NGOs should consider framing the press release in the following manner. The policy that permits the transfer of goods from Gaza via Israel to Europe but not the West Bank prevents the fulfillment of the state's productive potential and is contrary to both government decision and the declarations of security establishment on the need to enable economic development for Gaza's residents. The government must refrain from imposing restrictions on movements that are not necessary for maintaining security, which disproportionately harm the civil population or prevent Gaza residents from living a normal life. Much can be said about the difference between these two statements. The way Israel's security concerns are presented in the first press release as full and therefore should not obstruct human rights, while in the second one, human rights are presented as legitimate and something that should be actualized only so long as they are not in conflict with Israel's necessary security concerns. In other words, the way for Israeli rights organizations to be legitimized in the eyes of the Israeli public is to agree with the subordination of human rights to Israel's security agenda. Whether Israeli rights passionate actually end up adopting this new discourse is unclear, but if they do then, the securitization process will have achieved its goal. That's all for our presentation. Thank you.